Hello and welcome to Tech Canada's Deeper Insights webinar series. Throughout our webinars, we highlight timely insights from industry thought leaders and connect them to business leaders all across the country and beyond. This webinar, Leading the AI Shift from Strategy to Prototype in 3 Days, features insights from Jamie McMahon, Chief Technology Officer at ProServeIT.
Yeah, welcome everyone. My name is Jamie, and today we'll be chatting about really around AI, but thinking through how do we lead this AI shift specifically inside of your businesses, and think how do we translate strategy to something we can actually prototype or use in a very short period of time. And I think that's really the feedback we've gotten from many folks. Is it's still very early days. There's a lots of folks trying things out from a productivity perspective, but really, it's the innovation and thinking this through around how do we connect these investments into actual tangible business outcomes. That's the piece that people have lots of questions about. And hopefully, we'll have a few bit of answers here. If you have any questions, please feel free to pop them in. I will do my best to answer those in the flow. If there's stuff that kind of fit better to the parking lot, I will address those and make sure that no question goes unanswered at the end. So, with that, let's kick things off. As mentioned, my name is Jamie. I am the CTO here at ProServeIT. And not as a commercial, but I think it's really important, obviously, as a business, that for us, we look at every organization that exists right now, especially in today's times, as there's an opportunity to rethink your business through the lens of technology and almost to rethink your business and say, what would it look like if my business were in fact a technology business, right? How would we unlock your digital future? Are there opportunities for us to use technology to monetize better, create differentiation, create disruption inside of my field, inside of my segment? So today, I know that the topic is AI. There's been lots said about AI. I'm not going to be doing here's what AI is today. But I think what might not be known or broadly known is just how significant, how much money is being put behind this by all of the big players in the industry. And as a bit of a change of pace, I figured I'd throw up Mark Zuckerberg here, who many probably don't really think about in the lens of leading or one of the leaders inside of the AI conversation. But they're actually, I'd say, in kind of the top three, top four players right now. And what you see up there is a screen of a data center that Facebook, Meta, is building down in Louisiana. And if you superimpose the blueprint of that data center, it would actually take up roughly half of the landmass of Manhattan. So and that's roughly to the tune of 10 to $20 billion of investment just for that single data center. And they're investing $65 billion this year. Microsoft is investing $80 billion this year in AI. So we're talking big dollars putting behind this. And so the question that always comes up is like, well, how do we connect that? Like, why are all of these companies investing so much money when I can't necessarily see how that connects to something that's going to tangibly change my business? So let's have that conversation. Sometimes when people talk about technology, it really kind of gets into the ones and zeros, and we really feel that creates a barrier to having a really rich dialogue around how it can support your business. And we enjoy these metaphors. And for us, we think about businesses through the lens of a house. And I'd love for you to picture your business right now through the lens of a house. And like any strong house, it needs to have a strong foundation. And for us, that's security. So if it's not secure, it's not worth doing. On top of our foundation, we have kind of four core pillars or core rooms of our house. We have infrastructure. This is the rooms that has your data center, your devices, your Wi-Fi. It's all of this stuff that's critically important to run your business and probably at one point in time encapsulated everything around technology for your business. But today really only represents a portion of your technology investment. Beside infrastructure, we have our departmental applications. And these are the applications that are functional in nature. So think about sales for CRM, your accounting package for your finance team, et cetera. So it's these systems that we use, that we invest in, that again, we should be expecting some form of a return from that investment, but are functional in nature. Next to that, we have our brand experience. And this is really how your business is perceived through the lens of technology. And we perceive it to have kind of two major audiences. There's an internal audience, i.e. your employees' experience. And the thought is, what are those tools or what are those investments that we can make that are going to intentionally attract, retain, and grow our employees, our team members. Conversely, if we think about that from a customer perspective, i.e., the customer experience, what are those tools or technologies that we can intentionally invest in that are going to help us attract, retain, and grow customers? And together, both the internal view employee experience and external view customer experience represents our brand experience or how our business is perceived through the lens of technology. Final room of the house is productivity. And these are all of the tools that we love to hate. It's email, it's spreadsheets, it's Word documents, all of the tools that we use to help make us effective and efficient in our day-to-day work. And because of how much time all of us spend inside of these tools, we feel it deserves its own room for us to think about how do we maximize our productivity from a business perspective. On top of those four rooms, we kind of have a horizontal room here, which is our core business application. It's been our experience that most businesses kind of tend to have that one application that's a bit more important or more critical than any other application, whether it's your ERP, maybe if you're a not-for-profit, it's your donation management system. But whatever the case may be, most businesses have that one system that is just so important, and we feel it deserves special attention because it typically wants to be integrated to or tied to all of the rest of the rooms of the house. And finally, the roof of the house is insights and automation. And it's basically recognizing that everything below the roof creates data. And it's up to us as business leaders to look at that data that we have and think through, well, what are our opportunities to make better decisions with this data? What are our opportunities to look for automation opportunities, look for ways to make our business run better holistically? And so when we look at that kind of broadly through the perspective of the house, it allows us to use home renovation metaphors, for example, when we're thinking about replacement or technology investments. For example, if you're going to change your kitchen, renovate your kitchen, you have to think about where am I going to put the dishes? How am I going to eat? Am I going to barbecue for the next month? There's lots of considerations you have to make when you're doing that type of a project inside of your house. Similarly, if you're going to be doing an ERP replacement, you have those same considerations. Do I need to run those systems in parallel? What do I do with my own data? And so we just feel this gives us a kind of a common language for us to talk about technology without actually talking about technology. So I have this up here, and obviously we're here to talk about AI and think about, kind of leading that shift in perspective and using technology from an innovation perspective. And so the question becomes, well, where does AI fit in this? Right? Does AI deserve its own room? If so, where does that go? And really, AI is something that helps other tools be better, right? So AI creates the opportunity to allow us to be more productive. It allows us to be more secure. It allows us to get to better insights, probably better automation, et cetera, et cetera. So AI isn't a technology in and of itself that we need to invest in for the sake of it. It's what's going to help us supercharge or augment the opportunities that already exist, or perhaps allow us to tackle opportunities that were out of reach prior to AI kind of reaching this current state. So let's talk about AI. Let's pivot here. And normally when we talk about AI, I like to bring up consumer-based examples because I think a lot of us can see how consumer impacts kind of where we sit in our day-to-day. And then I'm going to pivot that into more of a commercial example. We can have a conversation around how this stuff fits inside of our business and kind of what the impact that it leads to. So to start, I'm going to bring up this young fellow here, Brew, who might look surprisingly like Tom Brady. That's because he actually is. However, Brew is actually a digital avatar that has a Facebook profile, an Instagram profile. He posts regularly. If you message him, he will actually respond. And the idea behind Brew is that when you're watching the game, sports, whatever it is that you're watching, typically it's more fun to watch with your friends. And so if you're alone at home by yourself on the couch, you can message Brew, talk about the game, debate sports, whatever the case may be. If sports isn't your thing, I've got two young girls at home, we can go and chat about Dancing with Coco. Or if you're more into Dungeons and Dragons and role-playing games, we can actually have Snoop Dogg be our dungeon master. And so you might think about yourself like, why do I have a screen with Tom Brady, Snoop Dogg, and Coco D'Amelio up on the screen here? And I want to ask you a question. So when we look at this, what's the difference between the Dungeon Master and Brew? And keep in mind, the Dungeon Master is basically the narrator of the story, He's the person that says, hey, I've walked into a cave. I see a dragon. What do you do? Right. And then it's up to you as a player to say, I cast a spell, I draw my sword, whatever. So the question is, what's the difference between Brew and the Dungeon Master? And when we think about it, the experience is actually very, very similar. But what differentiates those significantly is the data, right? Brew needs to understand all of the touchdowns, field goals, offsides, whatever is important from a sports perspective. Whereas the Dungeon Master really needs to understand uh, casting a spell, hit points, rolling dice, again, whatever is important from a role playing game perspective. So why I bring this up is I'd love for you to think about your business, because if we believe the hype, if we believe what everyone's telling us around AI, specifically from a productivity perspective, pick a time frame, 2 years from now, whatever the time frame horizon that might make sense. Most of our businesses will likely be using AI from a productivity perspective, and it really won't create any differentiation for us or disruption, right? Those that adopt it quicker or better perhaps might have a time-based advantage, but eventually, just like the cloud, everyone will be on, leveraging AI and have that same form of efficiency. But the one thing that none of your competitors will have, that we need to look for opportunities again as business leaders, is your data. What is the data that you have, that your organization has access to, that nobody else does? And how do we look at that data through the lens of, well, what if this was an asset? How do we invest this asset? How do we generate a return so that 1+1 = 3 for whatever it is that our business does that nobody else has access to? That's the opportunity that exists, that AI creates. So let's shift the conversation then to business. And what if Billy here wasn't a ride or die older sister? But what if Billy was your sales co? So let's go through an example. Let's say that I'm about to jump on a call with a new prospective customer, someone I've never met before. And I get on the call and we immediately generate rapport. We have great conversation. I come to understand that the person that I'm speaking to is leading a project to find a solution to the services that my business uniquely represents. I find out that the person I'm speaking to is actually the one that will be making the decision. They've got a budget allocated and a defined timeline for when they want the solution solved. So I, as a seller, leave that call extremely excited because I have budget, authority, need, timeline, right? I have all of the general qualification criteria. I've got great rapport. So we feel that we've got a great opportunity here. What if I could leave that call and go, hey, Billy, can you summarize that call that we just had and itemize any action items that were agreed to in the call? Can you then build a sales proposal for this customer, leveraging the last proposal that was just done by changing all of the context to what we discussed in this call, including quantities, products, details about the customer, anything that's relevant that we feel is going to help support our bid here and help win the opportunity. Once you've created that proposal, can you then submit it to my manager for review? Once my manager has reviewed it, can you then attach it back to the email for that final draft for me to review prior to sending it out? Once that final review is done and the email sent, can you then go into CRM and update all of my CRM details for me, including my forecast amount, any kind of quantities or SKU information that's relevant, customer details, call tracking details, maybe even the script, anything that we feel is relevant? Can you please make sure my CRM is up to date for me? Pretty remarkable, right? I think that's the promise of AI when we think about it from a pure productivity perspective. And that's the stuff that really today is possible. Everything that I've just described is things that are literally in market and I've personally done myself. So all of that stuff is not future state, it's present state. Okay, let's look at a separate example. We have Zach. And what if Zach wasn't a brotherly jokester, but in fact, what if Zach was your service co-pilot? So normally I like to bring a bit of levity to this and I'll ask a question, right? How many people here have phoned into a help desk in the last 24 months and were just blown away by how great an experience it was, so much so that you couldn't wait to call back that help desk to help them solve whatever problem was you're calling in for? Now, if this were all in person, I suspect most people would lower their hands because that tends not to be the experience we have when we call into a help desk. Well, what if it could look a little bit different? So let's imagine that I'm calling into a service desk or I have someone calling into me and I'm going to be answering the phone. And so I'll have someone call in and say, "Hey, Jamie, I'm sitting at the downtown Toronto office and my printer isn't working. Can you please help me out?" I say, "Great, no problem. Let me have a look at that." So while I say that, Zach whispers in my ear and say, "Hey, Jamie, I noticed that this person's calling from the Toronto office. We've actually had multiple people call in about the same printer issue. This was the fix that helped support and get those people back up and running. We suggest you go ahead and do this for this user right away." I say, "Great, thanks, Zach. I'll do that." So I take Zach's advice and I go get the printer up and going right away. And that user leaves happy and immediately solved. I will then go to Zach and say, "Hey, Zach, can you make sure that we update our ticket system, our incident management system with all of the details of that call, including any kind of configuration changes and things that may have occurred?" And Zach says, "No problem. I got you." Then says to me, says, "Hey, Jamie, I've noticed that there's a pattern here, right? There's multiple people that have called in for the same issue. And we feel that we need to kind of get to the root cause of this so that no one else needs to call with printer issues. And here is the suggestion I have for how to remediate that so that no one else needs to call in again about this issue." Especially, "Great, Zach. Thank you so much. Create a separate ticket and let's get that workflow going." I then say, "You know what, Zach, can you actually follow up with that user an hour from now and make sure that their printing happened exactly the way they thought it was? And then if it didn't, ask them what they'd like to happen next, whether they'd like to talk to me or we can take some other avenue to help get them support." So we've got two examples here, Zach and Billy. And on the Billy example, we have a pure automation play, right? This is where we are taking tasks that are onerous, that are important, critically important, but just really not a lot of fun and kind of taxes to how we do our work. And there's opportunities for us to lessen the taxes for how we do these monotonous tasks, monotonous but important tasks. The Zach example does that as well. So there's automation that's being incorporated into that conversation. But in addition, we are actually having Zach act in an agentic fashion. We're saying, "Hey, Zach, follow up with this user and make sure that they're good." So Zach is actually performing tasks without my intervention, and he's going off and doing things once I've asked him to do it. And so we've kind of moving beyond productivity, perhaps, into real, kind of touching our customers or enabling things, enabling experiences that we wouldn't have the opportunity to before. So the question is, if we're to think about it, like again, think about this through your business, the lens of your business. What are the opportunities to create a Scott, a Zach, a Billy? What would Scott be for your business if you're to think about what is the data that you have? What are the processes or workflows that exist? And how do we really look at them and say, let's enhance them. Let's improve the effectiveness of them. Let's really do something unique and make a difference to our business. Okay, so let's look at a real, like I gave kind of two examples here, but let's break that down to something that you can actually leave here today and put to practice. So let's look at that example I gave before with Billy, where we have, and if you recall, Billy was effectively, I was about to join a call with a prospect, and on that call, I had Billy help support me after the call to update my CRM, create the sales proposal, a number of automation tasks. But what if we back up that process to, I'm just about to jump on that call with a prospect? What are the types of information that I would want to have at my fingertips to help make that call be more successful? Would I want to know who the decision maker is at this customer? I'd want to know probably how long they've been in business, perhaps who their competitors are, what the specific need is that we feel they may have. Are they in a buying cycle? I probably have a lot of questions that I would help assist me be more successful in that call. So what if we look at prompts? And again, I'm speaking purely productivity here, and we're going to pivot to innovation here in a second. But from a productivity perspective, so I think where most people look at tools today, Copilot, Gemini, again, whatever it is, ChatGPT, whatever tools it are that you're using, my experience is that most people are still treating those tools like Google, right? They see a Google prompt and they type in a Google query, and that's just kind of how our brains have been trained for a number of decades. But for AI, it's really all about the context. We want broad information. So what if we had a prompt that looked more like this? Right. So we have that call coming up. I would like to know who are the stakeholders of that organization? What's the company do? Help me understand some of the overview information. Who are their partners? Are there any recent developments in the news around them? What's the financial analysis of that business? Any market analysis, competitor comparison, customer feedback, legal and compliance? Are they being sued by anyone? Anything that's relevant for me to understand, future outlook, etc. What if I had to create this and think about things like this and say, hey, we spend a lot of time building standard operating procedures. What if we could capture a lot of the process that goes into those procedures as prompts and have almost like standard operating prompts so that before you jump on a call with a customer, do this so that we know what questions to ask. All right. We can take this one step further and say, have this call. What are some really compelling questions that I should be asking this prospect based on this information and based off of the context of what my business does itself? That would likely, I suspect, lead to higher results. So let's have a look at this real quick. What I've done here is I've just opened up Word, and you see here that I have that prompt that I showed on my screen earlier that asks all these questions. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go to Word, and I'm just going to go to, in this instance, Copilot, and I'm going to ask it to create this document based on my ask. And so the reason I'm showing this is, again, I suspect most people have used ChatGPT, Copilot, Gemini, again, whatever tools that you're going to use. But I feel this is important because it does change or reframe how we think about using these tools. And you'll notice here that it's created a large document, but maybe this is not quite enough for me. Say, this is a great start. Please provide more context and details, at least another 500 words. And then it's going to go and it's going to rewrite this and give me lots of information around the folks that are here. Right. So I've got my stakeholders, I've got all of the information. So if we take this one step further and say, what if this was an actually prospect? What if this was already a customer? What additional questions might I have? Right. How long have they been a customer? Do they pay their bills? Is there anything that's large that's outstanding from AR that I should understand? Are they happy? What type of products have they bought from us? Is there any propensity to buy future products? If we could create all sorts of data that I suspect our information internally inside of our business could help us inference or help us identify these opportunities to ask these types of questions. And so again, when we think about productivity, I think it needs to go beyond taking meeting minute notes, summarizing emails. Those are all great starts. These are the pieces we can think around, I think, actually making business impact. Okay. So I mentioned before that I feel that many businesses are kind of in that productivity phase, right? They're still kind of, my experience, figuring out where do we go from here. And I think productivity is a great start. We need to get to innovation, right? That's really where businesses think about how to transform my business. And so let me tell you a couple of stories, and I'll actually show you some things to help support the storytelling. So what we found with innovation, at least where AI is today, right? I think in the future, AI is probably going to do all sorts of crazy things. And it's pretty interesting to think about, like, the AI that we see today is the worst AI experience that we're ever going to have in our life because the technology is only going to get better and better. And if we reference 2 years ago to today, the change has been dramatic. And I suspect if we were to fast forward the clock 2 years from today, the 2 years, our experience with AI would be pretty remarkable. But today, where this is making a difference in businesses are areas like this, where we think about speech, language and translation, using AI to do vision, content safety, and let me give you an example. So we work with an organization that's does identity verification for large rideshare programs, and what their business does is one of the criteria for accepting new drivers onto the platforms is, okay, how do we make sure that the driver is actually okay to drive, they've got a valid driver's license, and there's a whole bunch of other criteria that goes into before you're allowed to get behind the wheel and take on passengers. And one of the tasks that's important, obviously, is, okay, is the person that's doing this the actual valid driver, and is the driver's license accurate? So I'm just going to show you here, and I'm just using this with a boilerplate stuff with a West Virginia driver's license. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to query this driver's license to give you a sense for what's capable. And for that example I gave you before, what we've been doing is validating both the picture of the driver matches the picture on the driver's license, as well as looking for this type of information where it's saying, okay, what about the address, country, what types of information would we want to gather from the picture or things that we would like to see. And in this instance, you can see that it's identified that the country for this document is from the US, but it has a confidence score here. That's what these percentages are, saying that, hey, only 50% sure that this is the actual address. It's like, well, why is that? And so you'll notice that this address is saying Main Street in Charleston, West Virginia, with a postal code or zip code in this instance of 45679. And so AI is actually smart enough to recognize that that's a fake address. There's no street number, right? And that zip code 45679, it's probably not actually the zip code for Charleston, West Virginia. And so it's flagging it, saying, I don't think this is actually accurate. And now, based off of this, as a business, I can choose to do something. I can trigger a manual process, or I can say, no, I'm going to decline you as a rider because I've reviewed your driver's license and it doesn't return a result. I have a second example. We work with a HVAC organization, and what they do is they'll do HVAC work for large condominium buildings, right? And part of their process to estimate for projects is they actually look at the number of sprinkler heads that exist on condos. So inside the condo, there'll be X number of sprinkler heads, and there tends to be a correlation between how many sprinkler heads per floor and how much duct work and HVAC work needs to happen, because I believe that they kind of follow the same path, so to speak. And right now, what they do is they actually have a number of individuals whose role is to look at architecture diagrams, or physically, in some instances, count the number of sprinkler heads in order to get to some estimates for what a project's going to look like to put in some HVAC work for a condominium. And so what we've done for them is, from a very rapid perspective, say, well, what if we could actually look at your architecture diagrams for these condominium buildings and have AI actually, based off of those blueprints, understand how many sprinklers are going to be put in place. And so just again, to give you a sense, I went online, and so obviously I can't use real data here, and I'm not sharing the name of the company, but I went online and I found a non-copyrighted image of a house, and you'll notice that it's just an architecture drawing. It's got some schematics for fire suppression for the floor and a number of other pieces of information. And so what I'm doing is I'm actually going to go to AI, and I'm going to ask it things like, how many sprinkler heads are there on this floor, right? Who's the company that's drafting this report? And what's the size of the pipe that we're recommending for the sprinkler head? And so just 3 very basic queries. I can now go, and again, we've done this proof of concept with this organization. And what it's going to do is it's going to interpret that document, read it. And again, we're talking about a fairly complicated, this one is so complicated, but we're talking about what can be fairly complicated diagrams, complicated architecture schematics. And how do we pull out specific relevant information that, just intuitively we've had to rely on a person before? And can we get it to the point where AI is going to create this opportunity for innovation inside of our business? So you'll notice that it said there are 20 sprinkler heads. And so I won't count them all out, but those are those dots. it's saying that the company name is the Fire Protection Consultants and that the pipe size is 1 inch, which I think is actually in this instance, funny enough, saying 1 1/4 inch. But again, I just threw this up as it from a demonstration purposes with no training. This would be something we'd say, hey, we got results. It's actually reading this schematic pretty well. It got this one thing incorrect. Well, how do we tweak it, right? And that's where we want to say, using real data, using your data, how do we take these things and put it into the systems to make sure that we can get to something that's actually going to be meaningful for your organization? Final example I'll have, or final story I'll share. We have, and I think this is, you can kind of abstract this to lots of things. We have an organization, and I'm not actually sharing it here, that does property management, and which I work with them, and they actually have to interpret and read thousands of legal contracts, lease documents between tenants and the building property managers. And because they both do, kind of direct property management, but also subcontracted contract management for other firms, they have all of these lease agreements that are non-standardized. And again, they've had to have a person that looks at those contracts and is able to read them and say, oh, here's the lease start date, here's the lease end date, and interpret all of the information. And so again, now what we have, and this stuff is very accessible, we have the opportunity to look at that and say, well, what if we were to take that process and allow that person that knows our business really well to go focus in other areas and have the system be able to read all of the relevant information from all of these contracts that we're processing, digitize that in some capacity, and then allow us to use something with that information. So kind of 3 different examples of where we are actually seeing companies using AI from an innovation perspective right now. So talking about reading schematics, reading documents, identity documents in this instance, reading legal contracts, again, all sorts of things that we can do. And I'm obviously just touching the surface, but I kind of don't want to run through all of the elements of AI and overwhelm you with the technology. So let's tie this back to strategy. So this is all great, but what do we do, right? What's our next step? Or how do we turn this into something that we as a business can actually go and do? So I'm not sure how many folks here have watched the movie Moneyball with Brad Pitt. And if you're unfamiliar with the movie, basically the premise of the story is that long time ago, baseball players were evaluated based on how many home runs they hit. And the more home runs they hit, the better the team was expected to perform, the more that player was paid. Basically, the home run was kind of the most important statistic. And then what happened over time was that there was an accountant that figured, hey, it's actually not home runs that are most important. It's base hits, right? Getting on base, walks. So the more that you get on base, statistically, that's the most important thing that actually leads to business outcomes, to winning games. And I think the similarity here to how other people have valued or evaluated technology, and specifically AI, is they'll tend to deploy technology, turn on Copilot, Gemini again, whatever the case may be, try it out for a little bit, and almost immediately say, this isn't a big deal, right? This isn't going to change the world. And it's almost like they're expecting a home run within the first 5 minutes of using the technology. And I feel like that's kind of unrealistic expectations. Right? There's no other piece of technology, no other tools, no other process that you put in place, and that you'd expect an incredibly high value return after a very short amount of time. So there's kind of a disconnect there. Whereas what we feel is kind of a more natural progression is we need to be thinking in the framework of base hits. How do we get on base? How do we not look and measure success only through the lens of home runs, but how do we measure success on the incremental gains that we as a business make? And obviously AI or technology will be an element of that. And so if you're like many, you probably have a pilot of a handful of folks that are playing with this technology today. You got a very basic productivity use case, and you might be like, this isn't a thing yet, or I can't see the connection between this and actual business results. Was really what we're looking for is we're looking for those innovation use cases. what are opportunities for automation that exist? So again, thinking through the examples I gave earlier of performing your CRM updates and writing sales proposals for you. We're looking into um, other automation where it's going to read and interpret documents, read contracts, do a number of things for us that today really require a person to do. So it's all about taking the step and going beyond productivity into innovation. And you might say, well, how do I do that? So it's been our experience that you don't want to boil the ocean right off the gate, right? You don't want to swing for that home run. You don't want to try and have a really complex, high value still, but we don't want to have an incredibly highly complex use case as the first thing that we're trying to tackle with AI. We want something that we can really sink our teeth into, that is achievable, that we can measure value, or we can measure the effectiveness of it in a short period of time. And so we think in the days of, right, connecting and doing things inside of a week, right? Can we get to the point where we're actually able to prototype something with AI inside of a week? And for us, we view that in kind of an AI in a day framework. And so that's typically when we would engage with an organization, and everyone here, feel free to scan this QR code on the screen or email us at cloud@ProServeIT.com. But we'll work, and how we find that businesses can actually see something that is going to tie to their business is, first you need to have an idea and brainstorm, okay, what is it that we're trying to do? Is there a piece of our data? Is there workflow inside of our business? Is there a process that we can tackle? Like, what specifically do we want to try and improve the effectiveness or efficiency of? Once we've identified that, now it's time to build it, right, with actual live data. And I don't mean put into production. I really just mean more like a traditional proof of concept or a feasibility study, and saying, okay, we understand what we're trying to do. This is the way that we're going to go and do it. We just want to validate that, yes, we can read that architecture drawing the way that we think we can. Yes, we can identify the relevant information off of the driver's license and that it's returning the results that we're expecting. And therefore, it's giving me the confidence to take this proof of concept to the next stage, right? So it's that first day you want to really identify and brainstorm, okay, what are the things that we want to tackle and how do we measure it? We want to build it, we want to test it. And then it's okay, once we've validated that we can do what we think we're going to do, we can take it to the next step and look to incorporate that and build it into production. And so for everyone here on the phone, if this sounds like this is worthwhile or you'd like to have a conversation with us about, we do have kind of a time-bound thing for the folks here where we are willing to make a co-investment with you. This is kind of how strongly we feel that we can deliver results. And we'd love to have the chat to say, okay, how do we look at your business and look for opportunities for AI and kind of get to that prototype stage within 3 days? If you have any questions, I'm happy to kind of have that direct conversation. And if you feel that you have questions specific to this session, or in fact, you said, hey, I thought this was great, but I feel like part of my leadership team would really benefit from sharing this conversation too, let me know. And maybe we can kind of work something out where I can kind of talk about to your leadership team, kind of about similar precepts or concepts. The second piece on the screen here on the bottom right, you can either scan the QR code, and that's going to take you to reaching out to us, the offer, or you can contact us at cloud@ProServeIT.com. And my specific email address is jmcmahon@ProServeIT.com. So first initial, last name at ProServeIT.com.